What should we expect from Derek Carr this fall? What's the latest on Alvin Kamara's contract and situation? And which rookies should we be on the lookout when training camp opens this July? We're going to talk all about that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Rosevogel. As always, we're brought to you by Scott Fickner, Injury Lawyers, and by Crystal. Joining me for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast is just one of my favorite people in the world, not even just favorite Saints personalities, Ross Jackson, the host of Locked On Saints. You also check out his work as a writer and reporter for Saints News Network and Second and Saints with John Hendricks, which has been off to a blazing start. Ross, what's going on, man? Thank you for joining the show.
Hey, bro, of course, man. Thank you so much for having me on. Glad to be here with you.
Absolutely. So I'll just jump right into it. I know mini camp's in the books, and you've been one of the reporters there covering it every day. And for you, I know that there's probably been so many replies that you've had over not even just mini camp, but I would imagine over the last year of, Derek Carr, because he is a polarizing player to some degree. And look, he finished the season strong, but he started it poorly. And I think because of that, there are a lot of people frustrated with what happened last year. But now that he has an offensive coordinator, I'd say can at least make life a little bit easier for him and Clint Kubiak, at least on paper. What have you seen so far? Because I know we've all kind of heard how sharp he looks, how efficient, but a lot of Saints fans, and I think it's a normal reaction, goes, all right, well, that's practice. What is it going to look like in a game? And obviously we don't know, but what have you seen from Derek that would make us believe, you know what, there might be something different this season?
Yeah, I think the comfort is a big part of it. Look, it's a new system, it's a new offense. It's not an entirely new, never before seen kind of a scheme or anything like that. It's new to this team and it's new to this quarterback. But we've seen some comfort when it comes to Derek Carr getting in and out of the huddle. Play calls are even shortened this time around, as opposed to what they're accustomed to with the old Peyton, either the Peyton offense or whatever the version of the holdover Peyton offense that was supposed to be the past couple of years. Those things have kind of mitigated, gotten a little bit easier. And I think that the other thing that you look at too with Derek Carr, one of the reasons why he can be a little bit more comfortable here is, people can give Derek Carr, all the criticism that there is to be out there, right? Red zone inefficiencies, not necessarily late game inefficiencies, but late season inefficiencies, things like that, not ever getting to winning a playoff game and all those other things. I get all of it, right? But one of the things that he has always been credited for is being a very good quarterback before the snap. And so this is where Clint Kubiak really helps out. All the motion that is now a part of the offense, all of a sudden, that's clearly a part of the DNA, clearly a part of the identity, that goes towards helping Derek Carr strengthen something he's already and always been good at, which is that pre-snap diagnosis of what the defense is trying to do. So you add in that motion, it helps you diagnose those things. He's also always been a very good play action quarterback. There's a lot of play action in this offense. So I think that those things, if you're looking for something to maybe give you a little bit of confidence to say things are trending in the right direction, because everyone would be right to be curious about, being a little bit more like cautiously optimistic until we actually see it in a game. Everybody who's right about making that decision. But if you want to know if the building blocks are there, those are a couple of things that I think can give you a little bit of, positivity, a little bit of optimism around what Derek Carr and this new offense can look like in concert with one another.
Yeah, certainly. I keep telling myself, if he could have last year's numbers, but like a consistent version of it, it actually probably turns out to be a good quarterback. It was just the last 5 games, incredible. First 10 games, kind of somewhere in the middle. So obviously for Derek to be successful this fall, I think a big component of it would be having Alvin there doing his thing. And it's funny because when a guy like Clint Kubiak gets hired, he's one of the first players I think of is, what you can do with Alvin, because I think most people would say to some degree, yeah, the production isn't great the last couple of years, but I don't think the production is indicative of what he is as a player. I still think he's better than what the production shows. And when he kind of, leaves minicamp and it's a contract holdout per se, I know people will be worried, but the way I look at it, it's not like something that affects this year. Like I'd imagine Alvin's got to play this year regardless. But for you, how do you kind of look at this situation? Because I think for Alvin, you can argue that this could be a great opportunity for him to have a bounce back year from a production standpoint. And on the other hand, from the Saints standpoint, I would say, I could understand if they're hesitant because he does turn 29 in July, and you never know when you kind of fall off the slope. Like, I don't see Alvin as a guy who's lost like 5 steps and isn't ready to contribute for the next 2-3 years, but you just never know. And just what do you look at with this situation? Because obviously it's not just, the player, it's the position when it comes to this market. So how do you kind of evaluate it? Because it is interesting. Obviously, Alvin's told you about, him wanting to be a Saint for life, but obviously you don't always get to do what you may want to do in the NFL.
Yeah, I will say there have been other New Orleans Saints players who have told me that they would sign a lifelong contract and then they left the next offseason. So you just never know the way that's always going to work. But I think Alvin Kamara is genuine in that desire. And look, I think everything that is there to be illustrated about his desire to be a part of this team and his desire to simply want guarantees in 2025. Like, I think that's really what we're talking about here. He wants a commitment from this team about what his future looks like. And I don't think that that's bad to ask for. Will he get it? Won't he get it? It's all part of the negotiation. It's all part of the posturing, but asking for it, I don't think is the wrong thing. It's why you see a guy like Jamal Williams go on NFL Network and talk about how he stands behind Alvin Kamara 100%, especially at this position where you have to fight tooth and nail for every penny that you earn, especially when it comes to guarantees and all those other things. So I don't think there's anything wrong at all with him doing that. The way that I kind of look at this is if Alvin Kamara wouldn't have attended all of minicamp, then things would be a mess. But the fact that he attended 2 days after being in months of contract dispute conversations and then made a statement as opposed to a mess by not participating in the final day, although still showing up for walkthroughs. It's almost like, you decide that you're going to skip school, but you still show up for attendance for some reason and everything like that. Like I want you to know that I give a crap. You know what I mean? And I think that there's something to that. Alvin Kamara is not a malicious dude. Never has been. This is a guy that has consistently had the back of his players, the back of this organization, has even called out in some cases where things aren't working the way that they should be working. You remember last year, he talked about the team not having an identity, talked about seeing things and saying things in practices. The year before that, accountability, all those other things. This is who Alvin Kamara is, and he's a leader for this team. And the thing that the New Orleans Saints, and I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, the thing that the New Orleans Saints have to be aware of is that Alvin Kamara is that leader to this team. So any bad blood that gets created with Alvin Kamara has a big time ripple effect in that locker room. Players care about how you treat other players. And so that's one of the reasons why I don't think that this is as big a deal inside the facility as it's been made to be outside the facility. And B, one of the other reasons why I don't think this is going to be a huge hurdle for the Saints and Alvin Kamara, or rather more to the point, or more appropriately, Alvin Kamara's representation, right? His camp will end up being able to find a way to make the best of. Alvin Kamara is going to have a phenomenal year, I believe, with this New Orleans Saints team, even if the numbers are down from what people might be expecting or whatever. I don't know if he gets 1,000-yard rushing season. I don't know if he has to have 1,000-yard rushing season if he's also producing in the passing game, the receiving game, as we've seen before. I think that this offense is like tailor-made for a guy like Alvin Kamara. And I don't think he's going to miss his chance to get that done. But I also think that it makes sense while you have the opportunity here, make some noise, send a message, and let people know, like, hey, I just want that commitment in 2025. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I was about to say, as far as like contract holdouts go, this is like the most boring in a good way. Like, this isn't messy. This isn't Brandon Ayuk on FaceTime. And
yes,
right. I hope he gets his money too. I hope all these guys get their money, but it just doesn't feel that messy. And I think that's to your point about how good of a leader Alvin is. So you talked about, thinking he can have a phenomenal year in this offense. And that kind of leads me to my next point. I know there's so much conversation about the contract, and I just asked you about it, obviously, of course, but in terms of just the running back room, I know the sample size is so small because it's just the 2 days of mini camp where Alvin, is going through everything. But to you, did it feel like there still is that big gap where it's like Alvin is the lead dog in the backfield, and then you hope the role players kind of fill their role? Does it still feel that way at this stage in his career?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, Jamal's really good too. And so I think that having another veteran running back there with him makes the gap maybe not necessarily feel as big, but like the two play styles are so massively different. What I will say is that like Alvin Kamara looks like Alvin Kamara or looked like Alvin Kamara through those 2 days of minicamp, which I think is the most important thing that has to come from maybe this entire new offensive approach. Like, yes, you need Derek Carr to be complemented by this offense. You need Derek Carr to complement this offense. You have to pass to score points, but you have to run to win the game. And so for me, the way that I look at it is you have a wide zone offense that's coming in that's predicated on the run, that's going to rely a lot on play action, which is predicated on the run. You're trying to keep the quick passing game going on and keeping pressure off the quarterback, which can be predicated by the run. Everything comes back to the run game. And so for me, outside of the conversation of the offensive line, which is a separate piece to it all when it comes to the running game, having Alvin Kamara cooking is something that I think this New Orleans Saints offense not just wants, but needs. And so when I watch him during minicamp, what I'm seeing is an Alvin Kamara that looks like Alvin Kamara. And I think that's exactly what you should be looking for at this point. We'll see how maybe gaps and things like that begin to form a little bit more consistently over the course of training camp, though.
Okay, so you mentioned offensive line. I'll kind of use that as a segue to go into this. I feel like they're almost a great unknown. I know some people will say it's scary or like they're worried about 3 young guys in it. I totally get that. But we'll see. It's a great opportunity for all 3. And so far, I know it's so tough. I think this might be the toughest position for people to figure out at this point, where you just go through OTAs and mini camps to really determine how well a guy's playing at the offensive line. But at least from what you're hearing and talking to these guys, what's kind of been your early diagnosis of guys like Fuaga, guys like Saldiveri, and guys like Trevor Penning, who from a potential standpoint, it's all there. I'd imagine Fuaga is the one that maybe Saints fans feel the most confident in because he's still working at left tackle for now. There hasn't been that switch back to the right side, but what's been your early thoughts on those 3 guys and the way they've handled what's been thrown their way?
Yeah, I think you got 3 big question marks there. I think one of them is not like the others, right? Talaiasi Fuaga, as you mentioned, not a guy that you're probably going to have as big a question mark about. But there is an unknown to him. He's a rookie. But the unknown is logical because it's attached to him being a rookie. When it comes to Trevor Penning, I think that's where the biggest question mark is. He didn't work out at left tackle. Does changing his position entirely and starting him off from square one, does that give him a better foundation upon which to build, like a more clear path? Or does it confuse everything and then force you to have to relearn and forget stuff that you spent your entire life learning? I don't know which way it goes. I do know that Trevor Penning has said that he's very comfortable over on that right side, and the addition of offensive line coach John Benton, as well as, of course, the new offensive scheme kind of helps you. Everybody kind of gets equalized in that way. You have a new coach, you have a new communication system, you have new play calls, you have new concepts that aren't things that you've never done before, but maybe things that you're being asked to do that you haven't been asked to do a ton of, and maybe slightly differently and things like that. So I do think that there is a level of like the equalization that goes on across the offensive line where you have 2 solid answers and then the other things are question marks, goes a long way to helping to answer those questions. Saldiveri at left guard is a really interesting one because it's Saldiveri or it's Shane Lemieux or it's Luke Patrick. But I think that the thing that you really look at is it's been Nick Saldiveri up until he had whatever the injury was, groin injury, whatever soft injury that he had, soft tissue injury that he had during individual drills, which goes to show that it's probably not a huge deal, but the Saints were just kind of playing it safe for the final day of minicamp, that he is more of like, okay, can he stay healthy, right? We've seen the shoulder situation with him. Now we're seeing this. That's kind of the biggest question there, but he's looked comfortable there. I think the thing that I've taken the most from talking to the offensive lineman in the locker room is the word that I didn't think was going to be one that I was going to hear when I asked, how do you feel about the new system? How do you feel that you're fitting in? I've heard it a couple times now. Fun is the word that I was given. And some people might hear that and go, oh, well, who cares if it's fun? Like the idea is to be good, not to have fun. But I think having fun is a part of what this needs to be for this offensive line. I spoke to another player, played a different position, who talked about always being a part of the progression as a skill position player, that no matter what the play call is, there's a job for that player and there's a chance the ball comes their way, passing down, rushing, rush play, whatever. There's always some chance the ball comes their way, which is different for what they're used to, but it keeps them engaged. And so I think that the fun thing might be seen as, maybe not as important a part of the equation, but I think that it's a big deal, especially when it comes to the run game, which is going to ask this offensive line to move like crazy off the line. I think that fun leads to engagement, and being engaged in your practice creates the passion, which helps you get better. So I think that it all falls in line with one another.
Oh, now you got me excited. And when you said fun, actually, my mind immediately went to that Saints Bills game in Buffalo where they ran the ball. God knows how many times in a
What a
row,
pull.
right?
What a pull. Absolutely.
Because that's
2017,
fun.
I think that was.
Yeah, and I remember Armstead and all those
Man.
guys like that. That's the definition of fun for an offensive lineman, just kind of putting your hand in the dirt and just mauling people in the run game. So that to me, that is exciting and it's fun. It's funny that you say a word like that and it might seem so simple, but the way you just broke it down and it's accurate, it really does mean something. So I want to talk about the tight end room. I think for the offense, I know that wide receivers, are there some unknowns? Yeah, but look, you got two guys that you trust and you have some potential options and even some vets in Cedric Wilson. So I feel like there's some comfortability there. Tight end's interesting because even before the Juwan Johnson injury, I would say there were some concerns about the overall depth and just like the ceiling of that tight end room, it doesn't seem particularly high as opposed to others in the league. But one thing I loved, and I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, Ross, I don't remember if it was last week or 2 weeks ago when you wrote about Holker and how he's kind of viewed as that 8th round pick, which I think is just so awesome. And then, obviously the contract the Saints gave out kind of shows there is some confidence there. Have you seen enough from him? Not to say like, oh, this guy's a star in the league, but this is someone that, when training camp rolls around in July, that, man, I'm going to pay very close attention to him because there was an opportunity before the injury, and now that opportunity is even bigger. Like, is there enough there that you've seen to think that, man, there is that window for this guy to make some noise in July and maybe August in the preseason?
Yeah, I think that there is. Look, Dallin Holker is a really talented player, and boy, he's fun to watch. I mean, he was awesome to watch during OTAs, mini camps, all that other stuff. I think that what a guy like Dallin Holker does, and this isn't the typical way that you kind of look at like building out a position group, right? Typically, you're looking at the guys that are at the top, right? So, if Juwan Johnson returns from the surgery and looks really good and can pick up where he left off at the end of last season, 219 of his 368 receiving yards all came in the last 4 games last year. 3 of his 4 receiving touchdowns all came in the last 4 games last year. So if he can bridge that gap despite the injury, then I think it's easy to look at that and go, oh, well, that makes the tight end position better. But the other thing that makes the tight end position better is raising the floor, right? Raising tide, rises all ships, or whatever that phrase is that I just butchered. I think that the thing that a guy like Dallin Holker does is that he raises the floor of what that tight end room can be, because he's not going to be asked, more than likely isn't going to be asked to do a ton his rookie season. That tends to not be the case for rookie tight ends, unless they're drafted in the top 10 by the Atlanta Falcons, I guess. But outside of bad decision making like that in the draft, the thing that you look at is, what does he look like in a couple of years? But the thing that's really fun about Dallin Holker is that even if he's not asked to do a lot, when he is asked to be a part of what the offense is doing, there's something fun to see there. Not to go back to that word, but he's been a guy that has made really tough catches, runs really clean routes, especially for a guy that plays that position. Now he's 6'3", 240 pounds, so he's not the biggest tight end in the world. I say at like 5'10" and probably like 120 pounds soaking wet, but he's not the biggest dude at the position. And so I think that that's where he helps you, though, is that he makes I want to be very careful how I say this, but I'll kind of lay it out this way just for visual sake. He makes the bottom of what your tight end room has the ability to be able to achieve higher. It's not that he's a bottom of anything or the bottom of anything. It's just that it raises that floor a little bit. And so I think that there's always 2 ways to improve your room. Can you improve your base, your foundation, and can you improve or raise your ceiling? And I think Juwan Johnson might be able to do one of those things if he can bridge that gap and come back healthy. Dallin Holker does the other part of it.
So I've asked you a lot of questions about like in the now, obviously with what's going on, obviously about a month away from training camp. I want to ask you something that's kind of been on my mind. It's more so a fun hypothetical / training exercise, but we've reached the point in Demario Davis's career that I'm no longer going to put, a cap on when I think he'll stop playing elite football, because I think it's just, year after year, you're going, maybe this is the moment. And even last year, early in the season, I'm like, maybe he's going to lose a step. And then, you go out and you see Demario do what he does on a weekly basis, and it's phenomenal. So obviously he's been one of, if not the best linebacker in the NFL the last 4 or 5 years, if you just go on consistency. I'd ask you this. Do you think there's any chance, and I know he's more of a late bloomer career-wise, that Demario could put anything together here over the next couple of years that when his career's over, we could say, oh, there's a sneaky case here for the Hall of Fame, because I just keep seeing these numbers for him and what he's done, and it is incredible. But the other half of me wonders, man, if he was just with the Saints his whole career, then he wouldn't have a problem and worrying about it. But what's kind of your thoughts on Demario, not just what he's been able to accomplish, but the fact that he's doing it now at this age, and whether or not you actually think there's a case this man can defy logic here and put together a Hall of Fame resume?
Yeah, look, I'm not going to lie. Projecting Hall of Fame status is not one of my strengths. I'll be very honest about that. But what I will say is that I think that a guy like Demario Davis doing what he's doing right now, where guys, 10 years younger than him are struggling to do what he does in today's NFL, and we got to remember, homie, too, when it comes to Demario Davis, he plays a style of linebacker that the NFL almost obliterated at one point, of being the big, strong, thumper, downhill playmaker. That was almost the linebacker of yesterday. Now it's coming back because NFL offenses are getting heavier. And this is where, so I'll come back to why that's important, because I think that has an important distinction of what it means for Demario Davis's future. But typically we're seeing the hybrid guys, the Isaiah Simmonses of the world, the Hassan Reddicks of the world, the TJ Watts of the world, that are more pass rusher than coverage linebacker and things like that. Or you have the guys that are basically just like slightly bigger safeties and everything. Demario Davis doesn't fit any of those molds. Demario Davis plays linebacker the way that guys used to play linebacker. And it's really cool to see him be able to, kind of like Drew Brees did, extend his career by adding pieces to his identity as opposed to changing what it is that he does entirely. And so I think that that's something worth considering when it comes to Hall of Fame conversations at a later time. So if Demario Davis plays, let's say, 2 to 3 more years, right, including this season, and maintains this level of production, a handful of sacks, over 100 tackles, consistently getting into the backfield, leader of the defense, all these other things. I think that there's something else in that isn't on a stat sheet, that's not going to be the highlight play, that's not going to be on his highlight tape, that really is about how he maintained his status as one of the top linebackers, despite the fact that the NFL did everything that they could to remove his type of player from the field. And you can't keep Demario Davis off the field, and you can't keep Demario Davis, despite that, from impacting plays. I think that has to mean something. I don't know how much Hall of Fame voters take into consideration things like impact in the community, impact on the profession, and impact for your team. But if those things get taken into account just as much as the stats and all these other things do, then I think that Demario Davis, if he maintains this level of production, even comes down a little bit, but mostly maintains this level of production, it's going to be hard to not at least be able to make the argument in favor of him being a Hall of Famer. It might not go far for the argument against, and there might still be a bigger argument against that I'm not really privy to, but I think it makes it really tough to have an honest and genuine conversation in which you're leaving him out of it.
Yeah, I just felt like asking because, when I watch him, and I'm not expecting it to happen, I think my hopes for Saints players in terms of getting national recognition and love, sometimes I almost I get a little concerned about it. I'd rather just be cautiously optimistic or just not have any hopes at all. But when I'm watching him, even at this stage in his career, it's almost reached that point where it's like, even if I'm not feeling what the team's doing or they're struggling, let me not take any snaps from him for granted, because he truly is such a special player. So
good call.
Anyone listening right now, Ross has a very busy day, to say the least, and you will see more of him later today. But I want to give you guys the opportunity, before I let Ross go in a couple of minutes, if you have any rapid fire questions that you guys want to fire off in the chat, put them there and I'll get to them. In the meanwhile, though, Ross, I want to ask you this. So the second year guys for the Saints, I think there's a lot of talent there. And obviously I think Bryan Bresee the one guy that you feel like you can pencil in in terms of, he's going to be productive. If I had to ask you which one of those second year guys outside of Bryan Bresee you think needs to have a really big bounce back year, or just a really good year in general for 2024, would it be Saldiveri? Would it be Foskey? Would it be Jordan Howden? Would you go with A.T. Perry, Kendra Miller? I just feel like there's a lot of options. So I'll turn it to you. Yeah. Who would be that guy that you're really hoping breaks through in that second year?
Yeah, I think that the way you asked the question leans me to an answer that I don't typically give, because I think you asked this question in a really smart way. Which one of them needs to have the breakout year? Um, that almost makes me want to lean towards Nick Saldiveri, and I know that that's going to be highly unpopular because it's not a sexy pick and everything like that. I think that the player that will have the greatest opportunity to have a breakout would be A.T. Perry. Kendre Miller should be in that conversation as well, especially with this scheme. He's just such a good fit. But in terms of the guy that needs to have the big step forward, that offensive line will make or break this team in 2024, in my opinion. And so a guy like Nick Saldiveri is the one that needs to have the big breakout year in order to make sure that that make or break goes in the make direction as opposed to the break direction. It's really tough to get a wide zone offense, which is predicated on the run game, as we were discussing earlier, particularly athletic run game, right? Trying to get outside the tackle, moving an offensive line, trying to climb up to the second level, third level, all these other pieces. You have to be able to operate well in the offensive line. And if Nick Saldiveri is going to be the starting left guard, it makes him integral to the success of the New Orleans Saints' new approach to offense. So because of the great way you asked the question, which one of them needs to have that kind of big year, their second year, I'll roll with Saldiveri, assuming that he is the starter at left guard. If for any reason that's not the case, then I can go back to bouncing in between like the Kendre Miller and A.T. Perry conversations. I'd probably put a little bit more of the need on Kendre Miller than on A.T. Perry, just because we've seen it from A.T. Perry over the course of the last 7 games of the season, where we only really saw it for 1 game last year with Kendre Miller, and then the injury question marks and all those other things. So I think he's got a little bit more of the prove it factor that goes into that need. But if I'm not taking any of that into account and I'm looking at Nick Saldiveri as a starting left guard, I got to roll with him as the big need guy.
Yeah, and if I'm just going off hope, that's probably what I'd say too, because man, I think you got to get better in the trenches if you're the Saints. So
Yeah.
I'll throw some rapid fire ones at you before we get out of here, Ross. This is one that's always going to be asked, I feel like, but have you heard anything about free agent wide receivers interested that the Saints might be interested in? Or I guess a better way of phrasing it too, do you think the Saints have to have any interest in vet wide receivers, or you feel like they're comfortable right now with where they're at?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that we've seen recently that they have shown active interest in was Russell Gage. They brought him in on the tryout, but then he wasn't there for the 3rd day. So either things didn't go well or they went too well too quickly. I don't know which one it was, but that's a guy that obviously they have shown a little bit of interest in. I think they're waiting to see what they have in Stanley Morgan Jr. as well, who hasn't actually hit the field for them in a practice capacity. He's kind of been doing workouts off to the side and everything. And he's probably gonna be more of a special teams contributor than anything else, but I don't think that they really need to go out of their way. I know that the Hunter Renfrow conversation's always been a big one. I think you pick up the phone and call about Brandon Ayuk, because how could you not? You know what I mean? Which of the 31, if I'm the San Francisco 49ers, I'm calling, asking myself if I'll trade him to myself. He's just that good of a dang player. So I don't know that there's necessarily anybody that they're targeting or that they need to target on the free agent market. It's kind of dry at this point. But I think that a guy like Russell Gage would be one to keep an eye out on. And then seeing what they still have in Stanley Morgan Jr. But outside of that, it doesn't seem like there's much momentum to a guy like Hunter Renfrow or maybe any of the other free agents that might be out there.
All right, so we already know what to expect from Tyrann Mathieu at the safety spot. We'll switch it over on the other side. Who do you feel like is the leading candidate to be his running mate? I know that's a position where on the defense there aren't a lot of concerns, but that'd probably be one for fans. So who you expect to be the running mate of Tyrann Mathieu in the secondary?
Yeah, right now I'm going with Jonathan Abram. It's just such an easy match between those two guys. The last 2 games that they played last year, Tyrann Mathieu played 71% of his snaps deep and in the middle of the field, and Jonathan Abram played about 50% of his snaps down in the box. It's just perfect. It fits and does exactly what it is that you want it to do in terms of what those guys can look like together. They communicate incredibly well. You get the aggression from both of them just in different areas of the game. Jonathan Abram is very aggressive in the run game, downhill tackler, thumper type, while Tyrann Mathieu is a little bit more aggressive as a playmaker, which we've seen over and over again since he's been here. So I think the two complement each other super well. I think that other players will get opportunities for run there. Will Harris, who they brought in, Millard Bradford's a little bit more Tyrann-esque. He's a little bit more of a drop back deep safety, the undrafted free agent out of TCU. But I do think that they're going to get Jordan Howden a little bit involved and see what he can do playing down in the box, even though they like him more as a deep safety as well. But as of right now, I'd definitely say that I would be looking at Jonathan Abram as the running mate next to Tyrann Mathieu.
So this one, I don't know. This seems like I would phrase it. This seems a little too on the nose and harsh. So I'll reword this one here. I'm not going to say if Carmichael cost Alvin Kamara a spot in the Hall of Fame, but do you think that's probably been play calling and maybe the utilization of him been the biggest reason for the drop off? Do you think it's a little bit of a mix between age and that? What's kind of your assessment of AK? Because I know you mentioned before you really like how this new scheme kind of tends to his skills.
Yeah, I like the new scheme because it gets him out in space, which is something over the course of the past. Notice how I say this, the past 3 years, not just 2 years, but 3 years, it's been an issue for Alvin Kamara. So I agree that the Carmichael pinpoint is something, but we also have to look at Sean Payton's last year where Alvin Kamara was habitually run between the tackles as well. So it really extends out to the last 3 seasons. And yes, I do think that it has a lot more to do with the utilization. You also look at time missed, right? Suspension, injury, things like that. But I think that like the dip in numbers has a lot more to do with where he was pinpointed to run. Like what were his landmarks? Where was he being used to attack? Where were the screen passes, the wheel routes, all these other things, right? He had that one game last year where he caught 13 passes for like 30 something yards. Like you just didn't get him in space at all. And I'll even go so far as to reference this too. You look at Alvin Kamara's rushing numbers for last year, heavily was he more involved in zone run calls than man run calls. But the issue is that those were mostly inside zone calls, not outside zone calls. So it's still an entirely different offense that he would be walking into here in 2024. So I would say that his production and therefore maybe post-career projections, whatever those might be, have been impacted by the drop in statistics that he's had. But I also think that those drop in statistics have a lot to do with the way that he's been utilized and called upon in this New Orleans Saints offense over the course. I would go back to 3 years.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I remember it was about 3 years ago where I started going, all right, he's got to be used as the guy, not just a guy, but
Exactly.
It is what it is. All right. So this is the last thing I'll finish on. And I think it's pretty fitting. John O asks, who's a better interviewer? Rose Vogel or John O'Bars? I want to throw this in here. I guess I'll kind of answer this. When I had John O on, I did not expect him to come in like guns blazing in character immediately. And it was like the best 15 minutes I've ever had to start of any show of just like stone cold expression. So I don't know if he's going to give you that later today, but I would not be against that happening. But I love this guy. He's fantastic. Ross, before I let you go, last thing I want to say, obviously we got training camp in a little over a month from now. I know you said that the rookies are going to be around. I think it was July 16th. You may have said for reporting. So for you kind of have this window now. Obviously it's not, you kick your feet up and you're done for the rest of the day. But I am curious, is there anything that you'll be able to do in this free time? Is it catching up on a movie? Is it catching up on a book? Is it taking some time off to relax and spend what goes through the mind of Ross during this brief time that you have off before you start this marathon from July all the way to February?
Yeah, so I have a vacation plan for next week, although Locked On Saints listeners will not feel that vacation because the show doesn't go on vacation. I take my vacation from some of my other Locked On responsibilities, but I'll continue to write. I'll continue to do shows. I'll continue to do all my extra content and stuff like that, even while I'm gone. So going to Amsterdam for a few days, Norway for a few days, and then coming back home. And then I'm going to go and see my family up in Arkansas after that. So I have a couple of weeks where I'll be moving about and I won't be in front of this camera shot. Instead, I'll be in front of a whole bunch of varieties, maybe a fjord or whatever it's called. I don't know. I'll try to find something in Norway to do for fun. But I do think that there will absolutely be those times where I'll, get my time to go away. But the production and the content will continue to come because, as you know, buddy, this is not work. This is fun. It is work, but it doesn't feel like work. I mean, and it's too fun to leave behind even for a few days.
No, I agree. I'm glad you're taking at least some time to relax. You absolutely deserve it. Ross, thank you so much for coming on. Can you just let everyone know where they can find all your work, written and also video?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks so much for having me on. You can find the Locked On Saints podcast wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. Just search Locked On Saints. Same for Second and Saints with my good buddy, John Hendricks. And you can find all the written work over at Saints News Network, which you can find at si.com/NFL/Saints. If you want to find it all in one place, you can find it on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson Nola, NOLA.
Awesome. Ross, thank you so much for joining the show, man. I greatly appreciate it. It's always a blast talking with you.
Oh, dude, always a pleasure, man. You know how much I cherish our friendship and everything. So it meant a lot that you asked me to come on and look forward to much, much more, man. Thanks so much.
I appreciate it. Have fun with Jono. I'll be tuning in about 20 minutes from now. So I'll be in there.
Can't wait.
Once again, guys, that was Ross Jackson from Locked On Saints, Second in Saints, also Saints News Network. Make sure to check out all his work. Before I get into any comments I missed from you guys, I'm going to get to a quick commercial break here from one of our awesome sponsors, Crystal.
I need to clear something up about New Orleans. While our culinary scene might be on fire, our food has never been about heat. It's always been about flavor. And this is how New Orleans does flavor. Are we clear? Crystal. How New Orleans does flavor.
Once again, thank you to Crystal for being part of the program. We greatly appreciate it. So I'm going to switch over a little layout change here for the last 5 minutes or so. I'll get to any comments I missed from you guys. Early on, let's see. George said, I think you pay Alvin to see how he does in this new system that CMC did so well in. We know he can play better than him. Well, I mean, yeah, there's been moments, absolutely. What I said about CMC, though, and I've been pretty adamant about it. I think at this stage in his career, CMC is better than Alvin. It's not a knock on Alvin. It's more so a credit to what CMC's been able to do as a player, and he's fantastic. But I do still think Alvin is one of the top backs in the league. I just don't think he's been utilized that well. And Ross talked about it extensively, and I think Ross did a great job of breaking down just how this scheme should tend to his skill set better. So I think it's interesting because, to your point, right, if he plays really well this year and the Saints don't get an extension done, maybe the price is too much. Maybe the Saints lose him in free agency. So I think there's a middle ground, and I said it last week when we heard about the contract dispute. If you can get like a 2-year extension done, like a 2-year $20 million, a 2-year $18 million, I think that's the type of deal. If you could get that done, I would do it right away now because I still think Alvin could be a contributor for the next couple of years. But on the other hand, look, he is going to be 29. You do get worried about that age for a running back position. So it's not an easy spot, but I think luckily for the Saints, it's not the worst thing in the world. Like, I don't think they're in a spot where I'm like, oh, if they lose Alvin, they're screwed. Or if they pay Alvin, they're screwed. I don't see it that way at all. I think there's a little give and take for both sides. So we'll see what happens, but it's going to be interesting to say the least. Let's see what else that I may have missed. By the way, I'll get back to a quick comment from Will here. He said, did Carmichael cost AK Hall of Fame ending? I'm not going to say Carmichael necessarily did. I'll just say the whole coaching staff, because Alvin was on that trajectory, and then it just turned like there were so many moments where I felt like Alvin was used as just like a check down guy, and that is just a waste for his skill set. Let's see. No cap, no filter. Saints said, I don't blame Ross. I'd have to go to Amsterdam too if I had to cover Carr and DA for a season. Hey, look, man, I kind of understand, right? Dennis Allen, you guys know I'm not very fond of him. As for Carr, I'm indifferent about Carr. I do think he will play better this year, and hopefully him playing better means the Saints will be better, and us as fans can have more enjoyment, because the last 3 years there just hasn't been much to get excited about. So we'll see. He definitely deserves that vacation, though. Hey, there's no doubt about it. Mello says, who do you think QB2 should be right now? Right now, Jay Kaner. That said, the day is June 18th, and realistically, next month and the preseason will dictate that. And I think that's the best part about this quarterback battle. Like, you can't hide from it. If Spencer Rattler looks significantly better than Jay Kaner in the preseason, there's your QB2. If Jay Kaner looks significantly better than Spencer Rattler in the preseason, there's your QB2. So I would say the edge goes to Haener. I think if Rattler wins it from this year, though, that is a great sign for his growth, though, because think about it. When we kind of got into OTAs, we're all kind of talking about it, and he looked a little choppy, he looked a little shaky. So to see the progression into minicamp where he looks a little bit more confident, he's throwing the ball with a lot more strength, to get to the preseason where you maybe beat out a guy who is a second-year player with a little bit more experience than you, that would be a great start for him. So we'll see what happens. But right now, edge goes to Haener. Let's see what else we got here. AK might just need to be used more of how Eckler was on the Chargers to some degree. I think AK is such a better player than Eckler. I think Eckler is a really good fantasy football player. At least he was. And because of that, and PPR and all that, you know, you consider him a star. But then when you watch Eckler on the field, you don't see that explosiveness. You don't see that explosiveness like you would from a guy like Alvin. But I don't disagree with your assessment. I think there is something there. Zeus says, what would a trade package for Ayuk even look like? Well, I think it's fascinating. I think the minimum is like a second round pick and a fourth round pick, probably. Now, a first round pick, maybe for Ayuk, might get it done, especially for the Saints situation, because the Saints are not a team that is considered a contender. So that pick might end up being a top 10 pick, a top 15 pick, whatever. And maybe that's something the Niners value. To the way I view it, and I might be dead wrong on this. I really might be wrong on this. I think from the Niners' perspective, their best bet is just running it with what they got. They've been knocking on the doorstep of a Super Bowl for the last couple of years. Just run it back. Let's see what happens. And I still do feel like to some degree, they're probably just going to give Ayuk Amon-Ra St. Brown's contract and now get it done. But we shall see. As for flipping it over to the other side, flipping it for the Saints perspective, don't get me wrong. The idea of Ayuk, Olave, and Shaheed, man, you walk into Derek Carr's, quarterback room and you say, man, don't fuck this up, because this is a really good trio. But I could also understand from their perspective that you have two young guys in their third year that both are going to want to get paid. Maybe you want to see how they kind of produce in a new system and if they ball out. And I said it last week, if Olave has another 1,000+ yard season, he can go to the Saints doorstep and say, hey, I want Jalen Waddle's extension. And it'll be hard to tell him no, because the numbers would be pretty on par with his. So trade package wise, you're looking at a premium pick that you're giving up, maybe a little bit more, maybe like a sweetener, like a 4th round, 5th round pick. I don't know what it may be as the sweetener, but you'd have to get rid of one of your premium picks to get a guy, but it's a premium player. No Cap, No Filter Saint says, need you back on the pod, Chris. Great show, by the way. First off, thank you, man. Second, absolutely. I got to get back to answer my DMs. The one knock I have on, I have a lot of knocks on myself, but one of them is when I'm not in a great mental state, I don't check my notifications on Twitter a lot. And it's unfortunate, because sometimes the best interactions will be on Twitter, which is crazy to say, because some of the worst interactions you could have in your life would be on Twitter. So I'll get back to that. I'll DM you right after this, and we can figure something out for sure. Trey Gift says, Chris, got my Saints hopes back so fast. Look, I'm not saying anything about the Saints hopes. I've reached this point in my life where I'm tired of being this miserable grump complaining about Dennis Allen and the Saints. If he stinks, I will be here to talk about how they should fire him. And I think if you probably type in on YouTube, Boot Crew Media, Dennis Allen should be fired, you'll probably see my face in 55 different videos, because I have kind of tired out that conversation. I'd like to see them be good this year. I don't expect them to. I think the Saints are a mediocre team that could fight for the division, because the division is not strong, but that's kind of where I'm at. But I'm glad that Saints fans are excited, though. I can't stress it enough. There was a point this offseason where I genuinely was worried about the state of the fan base. I was like, man, is September going to roll around and no one's going to watch? People will be around to watch. How long will they stay? Well, the Saints got to make them want to stay. So that part I can't answer, but we'll see. Zeus says, what about the Saints trading Penning and some picks? Niners do need to look for a replacement for Trent Williams soon. Maybe the Niners would be willing to try to develop him. Look, that might be a sweetener. I don't think he's, a headline guy that you would move. I don't think Penning at this stage in his career is someone that teams would want to bank on to get and develop. He could be a sweetener, though. There's no doubt about it. And to your point, that is one thing the Niners aren't particularly great at, is their O-line. Trent Williams is fantastic. Aaron Banks is a really good player. But, you look around, Colton McKivitz is average at best. John Feliciano's average and getting older. Spencer Buford is not a good football player. So, look, they need O-line help, no doubt about it. I don't know if that would be the guy that would be their sweetener, because, man, it is a lot of work. If the Saints didn't think Penning was going to work, it doesn't mean the Niners will think the same, but there would be work going into that. I don't know if teams want that, but it's a fun idea. And I do think it's worth throwing out there, because they are a team that could need some O-line help. So we shall see. It's going to be fun to see how this offseason goes. So much of the Saints' hopes, though, are going to be on these young offensive linemen, man, because I know there's concerns about Fuaga and Saldiveri and Penning, but what if there is that slight scenario where, they're going to struggle, right? They're young players. They're obviously going to struggle. But what if there's more highs than lows? Maybe I'd say the outlook for the Saints is a little bit more promising. But we'll see how that all plays out. It's only June 18th. Training camp doesn't start until July 24th. And I just can't wait to see it. It's going to be fun to see how this all unfolds. But once again, guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in, leaving your comments, leaving your questions, concerns, predictions, all that. I greatly appreciate it. If you guys really enjoy this episode, I'll make sure to have more Saints personalities on in the future. But until then, guys, make sure to subscribe to Boot Crew Media on YouTube, and also stay tuned for more content here from the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation. And final sign off, Mello. How many wins this year? I'm going to say 8, hoping for 9 or 10. We'll see. But that's going to do it, guys. Straight Up Saints, the destination for the Who Dat Nation. Have a good night, everyone.